connected consumer. Hi, I'm Chris White.
And I'm Rosie Sarah, and we are the hosts of Parks Associates podcast, The Connected Consumer. This podcast is all about Parks Associates data-driven insights from various verticals in our consumer tech, featuring our research analysts and other leaders in the industry.
Today we have two special guests from Technicolor, Matt and Patrick. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Maybe we could start with some introductions. You tell us what your role is at Technicolor.
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Matt Newman. I work for Technicolor out of our Atlanta, Georgia offices. I'm in the product strategy and management group focused on our IoT initiatives. Mostly I'm working business development, and I do quite a bit of work with our ecosystem, maintaining partner relationships and the business associated with that.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Patrick, how about you?
Yeah, so my name is Patrick Groenmaier. I have to excuse me for my rather hard accent because I'm from Belgium. My role is Chief Solution Architect, and I work in the CTO office of Connected Home. And my main focus is indeed our diversification program into IoT. My background is mainly software over the last 20 years, from embedded computing to cloud computing and analytics, with a specialty in IoT.
Amazing. Really excited to have you guys join us today, as this is the first episode of the Smart Spaces series. So what do we mean by smart spaces? They usually consist of smart apartments, MDUs, retail, warehousing, hospitality, building management. And in this episode, we're going to be focusing on smart apartments, dorms, and MDUs. So I would like to start off this episode with defining what smart spaces are. So Matt, how would you define smart spaces?
Yeah, so I think smart spaces is obviously a very large category, and taken unto itself doesn't have a lot of definition. So it's good that we start there. So for us, smart spaces means the places that we live, work, and experience entertainment. And with respect to IoT, it means taking those environments and spaces that we're all very familiar with, and the devices and systems within them, and then turning them into smarter versions of themselves, if you will, to increase what maybe it's productivity in the case of a business, or access and entertainment in the case of the consumer space, whatever it might be. The example that I often use is the doorbell. The doorbell has been around for decades or centuries. I don't know when the doorbell was invented, but it's been around for a long time. We're all very familiar with it. And if you think of today's smart IoT-enabled doorbells, what they've done is they've taken an analog device that we're all very familiar with, and they've added networking to it. They've added a video component, and an app running on your cell phone or a tablet that gets you that network access. And so as a result, again, taking a device that's very ubiquitous and known to everyone and turning it into a smart device. And that's really part of the smart spaces, right? It's taking things within our environment and making them smarter and more intelligent. So that's how I would define that.
All right, great. So your example of a doorbell. So I think commonly we think of the doorbell as being something for a single family home. You see the commercials for Ring or Nest or whatever. It's usually a little house and there's a person delivering a package. But it's a little more complicated than that in an MDU space. So talk a little bit about how IoT use cases are different in sort of apartments and dorms as compared to single family.
Right. Yeah. Technicolor believes that the multi-dwelling environment is one of the best smart spaces to focus on, actually, for that reason. So if you think about a single family home, the obvious things that come to mind are you have a lot fewer people, right? You're talking about a single family versus an apartment complex or a dormitory. And the other thing you might think about is density and the number of devices in terms of density, right? So in a home, even for a gadget freak like me, I might have 35 devices in total. Connected in a apartment complex or a dormitory, you're talking thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, who knows? Right. So I think it's all about number of users and density that differentiates the multi-dwelling space from single family home. And that can be both residential and on the commercial side as well.
Matt, I would like to add a couple of things, because I think the doorbell and the door in general including also the lock and the access control element, I think is beneficial for, of course, for the end user, for the tenant. I mean, he can use that maybe part of it as a peace of mind. When somebody rings and he is not at home, he can at least see who is on the door. That is one aspect, but I think for the property manager in perspective, the same doorbell and the same lock can mean much more for him with respect to, for example, reduction of his operational cost. One of the, I think, most compelling use cases when you have smart access control for the operations is that it can allow visitors when the apartment is empty to come and get access to that apartment, looking around in the apartment without having to send somebody over, which is a costly kind of endeavor to make that visitation happen. So I think same kind of use case, but for the property manager, there is much more business value in it if you look at it from another perspective.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
Great. So with these use cases in mind, can you expand a little bit more on their networking needs and what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think from a networking standpoint, of course, again, with the fact that you do have a higher density of devices in the multi-dwelling space as well as more users, you can look at a couple of different scenarios. The products that Technicolor sells, which are really broadband enabled products to which we've added IoT capabilities. So we've taken world-class products that we sell in millions of units, and we've layered in this IoT functionality. If you think about that from a networking standpoint, you can go a couple of different routes. You can have a mesh network set up where a large area is serviced by maybe a smaller number of devices, where you've got the Wi-Fi mesh as well as various IoT protocols like BLE or Thread or Matter, for example, being serviced by these devices in a kind of a shared environment. But you could also imagine a more premium service potentially, where every individual unit or tenant, if you will, within the multi-dwelling space has their own IoT gateway to which they can even possibly add devices in a bring your own device type environment. So, and I think there's everything in between. So from a business standpoint, Technicolor is absolutely focused on that entire spectrum. Maybe Patrick can add some of the technical aspects associated with that because there's plenty of challenges in that space.
Yes, please do, Patrick.
Yeah, so let me indeed add. I mean, you're talking about the networking needs. I would try to keep it broader and talk about connectivity needs. We know that we have networking, IP networking, like we traditionally used to know, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, etc. But IoT brings an additional kind of connectivity to the table. We know that, for example, in the future, Matter will also add networking, IP kind of connectivity to the table. And in general, it's all about coverage. I mean, we're talking about smart home. For the MDU, it's the complete building. So the property managers are looking for an overall connectivity solution that can cover the whole building, not only the apartments themselves, but also the corridors, the pool area, etc. And in that whole realm of connectivity, he wants to have both IP connectivity for his networking needs. A lot of the use cases are using, for example, IP cameras or Wi-Fi devices. But at the same time, he also wants to have coverage for the other IoT devices, sensors, actuators that are working with connectivity protocols like Bluetooth and Zigbee, Z-Wave, etc.
Yeah, so you mentioned a lot of different protocols there, and we're talking about a bunch of different devices. And in terms of monetizing this, there's also a bunch of platforms involved. So there's a lot of kind of players going on in this value chain that Technicolor is kind of sitting in the middle of. So could you talk to us a little bit about kind of partnerships that you guys are doing, what it's like to work with ISPs, prop tech companies, and access control device makers, all the different type of people you're going to be kind of interacting with as you try and deliver your services to people in the apartments and dorms?
Yeah, sure. So actually, partnering and building out the ecosystem is a core element of our strategy. In fact, we have a strategy we call the 4 C's: connect, collect, compute, create. So Technicolor is focused on what we do best as a world leader in gateways, which is the edge device, the connect and the collect piece. So if you think about it, our IoT gateways that are IoT enabled are sitting at the edge. They're connecting to the Wi-Fi network in place, and therefore, by virtue of that, have internet capabilities. And then they're also connecting to the variety of devices in the immediate area from an IoT standpoint. So they're playing both roles. And then, of course, data is being collected from all of these devices. The gateways that we manufacture have a pretty robust horsepower to them, so you can do a lot of edge analytics. But at the end of the day, that data really has value once it's aggregated in the cloud. So, and this is where we get to the partnerships and the ecosystem that you just asked about. So on the cloud side of things, which we call the compute piece, we're partnering with all the major players: Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Ayla Networks, and others. So we have a variety of partners that we can bring into the solution based upon the client's needs. In this case, with the topic we're talking about, that would likely be a property manager or developer. And then on the create side, which is what we call the application. So the end user app, which is where all the value is delivered to, again, in this case, a property manager or a site manager, what have you. That application would be developed by one of our ISVs or independent software vendors that we've partnered with in the ecosystem. So again, the 4 C's is about bringing the whole end-to-end solution to bear, with Technicolor focusing on the edge piece that we do best, partnering for the cloud and the application piece, and bringing all that as an end solution. So yeah, partnering is a huge part of our strategy.
Right.
So, do you want to add anything to that, or I'm sorry?
No, I think I fully agree with you, Matt. I think the complexity in the IoT space is indeed, both from a business angle as from the technical angle, is so vast that not one company can cover everything. So indeed, like Matt said, partnerships are extremely important. We try to focus on what we are doing best. We have a platform approach, a very open platform approach, and we indeed partner with those ecosystems that really bring added value to these solutions. And that's where I think, let's say, at the core, we are partnering with IoT platform players. And then for the rest, we are partnering with specific system integrators or ISVs that can complement these kind of solutions.
Yeah, well, while we're kind of right here and talking in generalities about these kind of deployments and solutions, do you guys have some specifics, like, particular projects or deployments that you kind of think of as, I don't know, I always want to ask people their favorites, and then I'm always trying to think of a more sophisticated way to ask their favorites. Guys, what is your favorite deployment in the apartment and dorm space that you've worked on in the past or are currently working on?
Yeah, so we've done a variety of things, and I think again with the fact that our strategy is a B2B strategy, right? So we're targeting again the property development companies, the property management companies, and the value flows from there to the actual tenant or consumer. So
right.
So I think the ones that we like are the ones that have the most obvious return on investment for the customer, right? Because those are the ones that are easiest to sell. As you go into talk to these property managers and developers, if you can clearly show a return on investment, it's so much easier to get them to buy in. And so, as some specific use case examples, there's many, but some that come to mind: utility management. So obviously, utilities are a huge cost component of running a multi-dwelling space, whether it be an apartment complex or a dormitory, what have you. Mm-hmm. And so if you can bring IoT technology to bear on that to better control costs through energy savings, green initiatives, what have you. A specific example: a tenant moves out, the apartment is now empty. What if they left the thermostat at 80 degrees in the middle of the winter? The heat's running constantly, right? Well, remotely through IoT, the landlord or the property manager can go in and adjust that temperature to a much lower setting, save energy, save cost until a new tenant moves in, and then they take over, as a specific example. Other areas we use a lot. Another example that we like is water leak detection. If you have a pipe burst or a sink overflow or a washing machine overflow on the 4th floor of a building, it doesn't take long for that water to create a catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
The waterfall effect. Now you flooded 3 floors or 4 floors or what have you, right? With water leak detection and valve shut off, a property manager can quickly get a return on investment calculation on that, right? And in terms of savings from taking something that could be a major catastrophe and limiting the damage. And then they can go to their insurance company potentially even and get a break on their premiums because they have the system in place. So these are just a couple of our favorites, but really broadly speaking, in the multi-dwelling space, there are a variety of energy, management of devices that are on site, and others that have a clear ROI. So those are the ones we focus on the most.
Great, Patrick. Any input there?
No, I mean, if we let's say take a specific example of the one that excited me the most, and Matt has, I think, focused on some of the use cases. For me, a very other interesting aspect was providing the whole connectivity in that building, because traditionally, either that connectivity is delivered by a network service provider, but then you still have something separately for the IoT part. Being able to deliver one solution, which is, I think, decoupled from that traditional internet access kind of solution, that was really exciting for me, because there we saw that our solution that can create that kind of mesh in that building was extremely interesting, and it reminded me on a kind of saying that was very popular 20 years ago, and that came from Sun, a typical statement where they say the network is the computer, meaning all our devices in a mesh really started to act as the infrastructure in that building to provide these new IoT services, and that was really exciting for me.
I think it's great that you guys touched on some of those examples that really benefit the property manager a lot and are sort of invisible in some cases, right? Like the residents don't know that they're getting this great benefit. The property managers certainly know, working with this job, a lot of people ask me like for recommendations on like, what is the coolest doorbell brand? And I always kind of reverse the conversation to be like, do you have water leak detection? Can you please put a $10 sensor under your sink and under your water heater? Because like it's the eat your vegetables type stuff that really matters to the people in the space. Even though it's sexier to talk, let's talk EV chargers or, video analytics, facial recognition, all that stuff. Like when you get into conversations with people in the industry, it's like, oh, how can we get some of the simple products working to prevent catastrophe, allow us to be more proactive and connecting, part of the cool thing about smart spaces that is not going to necessarily kind of like entice renters to come in, but is going to really help with ROI is this idea of like catastrophe prevention.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned energy reduction, and no one moving into a new apartment building is going to be excited that there's smart blinds in the like atrium area or something, but that's the type of thing that actually saves the property manager a lot of money when he can at certain times of day put the blinds down and make sure that they're always down instead of relying on a maintenance guy to do it or something like that. Like some of the little things like that are really important, and you need a networking solution to get out to all those sensors that are in places that maybe no one cared before. Maybe there was no one sitting there with a laptop thinking, well, I can't work from home over here, so I care about networking, but all those little devices and stuff certainly do care. So I think it's cool that you guys are thinking about both sides of that, kind of both of your customers in the sense of your B2B customer, and then you're also your B2B2C customer, the end user.
Yeah, I would say that I think one thing a point to add to what you said, which is excellent, is that you can create stickiness, right? So you're right. Does somebody who's hunting for an apartment sign on the dotted line because they have smart blinds or whatever else, right?
Right. The water leak sensor.
Yeah, right. Probably not. But once they move in, right, and if the property manager is able to realize cost savings, clear definable cost savings, they can kind of layer in some of the sexier, visible type IoT services that do matter to the consumer. And then once they're moved in and they get kind of hooked on that kind of stuff, it creates, I think, a stickiness that they're less likely to maybe move on.
Totally.
Get that somewhere else. So, yeah.
Totally. I agree. So we're focusing a little bit more on, the property tech, but I want to shift into, residents that move in that already have connected devices. So our data says that 43% of US MDU residents report that they use smart home devices, including a mix of the property provided devices and devices that they've already purchased at retail. So can you expand more on how, existing IoT devices work?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big challenge, right? Because if you think about it, the property manager is probably going to have some reservations about certain devices being brought into the system, right? They're trying to maintain control and lower their cost of maintenance and whatnot. And so to have the tenant bring just anything they want to the table could be a recipe for disaster. So what we've seen is that in many cases, there's a curated list of acceptable devices that the tenant is allowed to bring in. An example of what they're not allowed to do in most cases is the door lock, which is the sort of the epicenter from the property manager's standpoint of the access and control and security of that unit, right? So you don't want the tenant swapping out the door lock for something their own, because then the landlord loses that control and over that unit, right? So, but on the other hand, if they've got other IoT devices that, again, maybe lighting is a great example, smart lighting, IP cameras to keep track of their pets while they're away, for example, so they can see what their cat or their dog is doing while they're off at work. Those types of things are pretty benign, right? And they can be added in, and they're especially benign if the property manager can say, here's that curated list of devices and maybe even brands that the in-place system supports. So your bring your own device type scenario doesn't spiral out of control.
Yeah, would like to add on that, because indeed, I think that is today specifically for the MDU setting and the biggest challenge of all. On one hand, you have the end user. He has his own preference. He brings his own devices. And with preference, I mean, some of them, they are hooked into the Amazon ecosystem. They love Alexa. Others are Apple fans. And some others want to have a Google Assistant. And it's in the end, you need to make sure that mix is working. These kind of consumer devices are also working in tandem and in a kind of interoperability with those kind of managed devices, these kind of curated devices that Matt has mentioned. So I think that is the biggest challenge today. But that is also, I think, where we, with our pedigree coming from the smart home, knowing all these standards, can come to kind of proper solutions so that these things are working hand in hand or glove in glove.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we're getting a little towards the end of this episode. It's been a wonderful conversation so far and a pleasure chatting with you guys. Thank you for joining us today. Please tell our listeners where they can find you on socials and anything you have coming up at Technicolor.
Yeah, so of course we have an IoT webpage off our main www.technicolor.com website that they can go to and learn a little bit more about our products. There's a video on that site, for example, that kind of gives I mentioned earlier the 4C strategy. It kind of elaborates on what our strategy is, what our targets are, and what our products bring to bear, and the ecosystem that we talked about as well in a concise couple of minutes, so people can learn a lot in a short period of time by looking at that. As with most of us, I'm on LinkedIn. You can search for Matt Newman Technicolor and find me there, and certainly message me in that way. And as far as what's coming up, I think I touched upon this earlier, but Technicolor has a very broad portfolio of broadband products, and we're constantly layering into those IoT capabilities. So we have a very well-defined roadmap that extends out over many years. So what I think is exciting is that there's always more and more technology being brought to bear to the problem, solving problems and adding value, for the kind of challenges that our customers are looking for. So that's we're constantly making new announcements in that space, and that typically is highlighted on our website.
Great. Patrick, do you have anything to add? Is there anywhere we should be following you?
Just like Matt, I mean, you can find me on my LinkedIn with my name and Technicolor kind of background. So if anybody wants to reach out, they can find me on my LinkedIn. I also have a couple of links on white papers I have written on the topic on my LinkedIn, so people can feel free to contact me.
Great. So, so speaking of white papers, we actually have a white paper that we partnered with you guys. Our colleague, Kristen Hannick, who is our expert on home services and broadband, has been doing that for a long time, put together a really interesting white paper on the topic of smart spaces that we're going to be sort of linking and kind of promoting alongside the release of this podcast. So everyone who is listening to this audio or watching this video, look around for some links that you can get the paper. It's some deeper analysis from an industry expert who knows a little better than me or Rosie. I hope we asked smart questions today, but Kristen's smarter on that. And then also include some data that we gather on the topic based on our 10,000 person survey that we do each quarter. So I think it's a valuable white paper. I think all you have to do is sign up and give your email address and that type of thing. So anyone interested in this episode should be interested in reading more. I think go ahead and grab that thing for free.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say that at Technicolor, we really enjoyed working with Parks on that white paper. And I think it is very valuable. A lot of good information there.
Oh, good. Thank you for saying so. Tell Kristen.
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure to add it to the show notes on just all of our audio platforms and our YouTube video. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Connected Consumers, thank you so much for joining and listening into this episode. Make sure to subscribe as we have lots of great upcoming episodes, like we mentioned earlier, including our Smart Spaces series. And don't forget to check the show notes here in this episode. As always, we want your feedback. Please feel free to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet at us at Parks Associates, CY Insights, or Rosie Alpino to let us know what you think and what you'd like to hear next.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for also the next episode. We're going to try and talk about hospitality and senior care, and then later retail and warehousing. So we're going to cover the whole gamut of major areas that you guys serve. I think it's going to be really interesting. I look forward to talking to you guys again.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.